Hello and welcome everyone to our latest webinar. So my name is Pascal Joly. I'm leading the technology partnerships at Quali, and I'm joined today with Dosanjh, who's a solution architect at Quali as well, and he's going to talk today about how to migrate an on-premise application to the AWS public cloud, and more specifically, giving you a process on how to replatform an application using CloudSandboxes. So welcome, Dos.
Thank you, Pascal, and glad to be on this webinar and looking forward to sharing the topic.
Great. So before we get started, I'm just going to quickly introduce Quali for those of you who haven't heard about us yet. So we are a venture-funded startup company who is focused on cloud automation and orchestration. We have a platform called CloudShell, which delivers cloud sandboxes as a service. And we have about 150 plus customers, including some of the major cloud providers, telcos, and a lot of enterprise as well. So that said, I'm just going to pass the ball on to Dos, who's going to educate us about this exciting topic.
Thank you, Pascal. And as Pascal mentioned, with application migration, a lot of organizations are undertaking this opportunity in time where technologies have evolved, and now they're making strategic decisions on how to move applications into cloud environments and how do you actually enable them. So we'll touch upon a couple of strategies and then focus on the enablement. What we've outlined here in this slide is 3 prevalent strategies: the rehosting, which is commonly referred to as lifting and shifting an application, a replatforming, where you're lifting and reshaping some of the nodes, and then the refactor, where you're actually looking to create the application from scratch and make it cloud native. As organizations are looking to identify a strategy that works for them, there's a lot of components that you have to take into consideration: the complexity, the security and privacy of data. How do you actually orchestrate all these moving parts? Integration obviously is a key component of that. And then do you have the necessary skill and experience to undertake this application migration? So as I alluded to earlier, one strategy may work for a particular organization where another organization may have to go down a different path. But the enablement of these strategies is a key component of what you have to focus on. And what we're going to share with you is how you can use one of those strategies in the Amazon Cloud Service. And what we're looking to provide here is Amazon does a great job of providing templates, tools, various machine instances that they have in their portfolio, their catalog of different services, if you will. And they provide the underlying infrastructure, a foundation, if you will, to where you can now start to develop your business applications and other interconnected services. They do a tremendous job in providing that fundamental layer. What you really have then is an opportunity to tailor what they have to your application and then introduce different tools that can help you to orchestrate, to design, to architect on top of what Amazon has provided. And what we've seen is you really need an easy to understand and easy to model and design. So you're not spending a lot of time and energy in trying to figure out how to interconnect these tools and platforms and services. You really want to get, does the application function? So what we're seeing is a benefit between the native fundamentals of Amazon provides, the additional abilities from organizations like Quali CloudShell, and then you have an opportunity to combine those into enabling solutions a lot faster. You can integrate different workloads, and then the beauty of the cloud is obviously automation. How can you kind of repeat certain processes that work really well? And the cost, always being cost conscious, how can you then turn off or terminate services that are no longer required and bring on new services when they are required for that application? So the augmentation is a real critical component of how you enable these strategies, and the tools, how you orchestrate them together, then allow you to migrate effectively. So let's go ahead and take a look at then how you would start this whole approach. You definitely have to assess your on-premise application. You have to decide on what strategy you're going to select. In this case, we're going to focus on the re-platform, the lifting and shaping of that. And then we're going to share with you how in AWS you can actually enable that strategy and then go through the modeling, deployment, the validation, and then termination of those environments using CloudShell. So that's what we'll demonstrate here in a moment, but I want to share with you first that architectural overview. So in this re-platforming, we've selected a Drupal content management application, and from a high-level overview, we've diagrammed here an enterprise on-premise version of that application. We've simplified the network components just to show you a front-end load balancer, F5 in this case. And we've got a typical 3-tier deployment model, what you see in a lot of the enterprise organizations. You've got the front end, the presentation tier, if you will, with the Apache web server. You got some application logic in the business tier. That's where we have the Drupal application residing. And then you have a MySQL database running in the data tier. And then what this company is going to do with a re-platform strategy is you want to go into the AWS cloud and start to select different nodes and instances that make sense for that organization. And in this example, we've selected the Nginx load balancer, and we've used some of the native AWS components. And these could be machine instances or other VMs that are running natively within AWS. For example, the data tier here is the Aurora database, but you can choose other databases, but that's really a part of your strategy as far as what works for that application. And then you get into third-party integration services that add value to what you're doing. Value in this case is to make sure that the application is functioning as expected. You can use functional tools like Source Labs. The load and performance is actually being adhered to for your SLAs, service level agreements, and other query response to the application using tools like BlazeMeter. And then making sure that security and compliance, if you're checking for vulnerability, you can introduce third-party vulnerability scans from White Hat Security as an example. So those are the kind of things that you would do from a re-platforming. And then you start to look at where does CloudShell come into place, as I talked about earlier, how to augment the existing foundational tools from Amazon, and then how do you complement that with Quali CloudShell. And as you look at this diagram, you'll notice at the top from the interface perspective, it's really key to what I believe is easy to use interactive interface where you can actually call out these different services using REST APIs and then connecting to what you require. The environment that's created, a combination of application, the databases, the tools, and the flexibility where you can really get into mixing and matching your environments. A key component of CloudShell is if you're an organization that has stringent data requirement rules and you need to maintain certain assets within the enterprise domain, you can actually include that in this architecture. So physical infrastructure within your enterprise environment can still be maintained, and you can connect to Amazon and now use a hybrid model of how those cloud services would interact with your data center services. And then there's various other services that you can also introduce from a monitoring and other alerting standpoint. So all of this is flexible enough to deploy in Azure, Google Cloud, or Oracle, or OpenStack, public and private and hybrid, but we're going to focus on the Amazon cloud today as the example. So let's take a quick look at the CloudShell AWS architecture, and it's pretty straightforward. You install this in a virtual private cloud within Amazon, and we have 4 components that make up the actual services, the commands, how they're executed, the actual server component, then how you connect to different resources within the server itself. You then, as you start to orchestrate and deploy application assets and service assets, you actually create another VPC, which you can now start to spin up and spin down as those default services within Amazon are deployed as application assets, or you may have third-party integration services, which you can then define as service assets. So it's pretty straightforward. It's running all within the Amazon cloud, and then that obviously takes advantage of what the scaling and other services that Amazon provides. The reshaping of this, the lift and shape or the replatforming, is where you can get some flexibility onto what works for your application. Per my earlier example where the Nginx load balancer was included, you can decide if you need Nginx Plus or HA proxy or F5 or other native cloud services from Amazon like an Elastic Load Balancer. This is really key to where you want to determine what works for your application and if it's meeting those service level requirements. And that's really where you can start to mix and match and get a sense of cost effectiveness, efficiency, and how quickly can you patch, update, or do some firmware updates if they are required also. So with that said, let's go into an actual demo and show you this in action. So I'm going to go ahead, and what you'll note here is the CloudShell login screen, and I'm going to go ahead and log in as a user. And what you'll note at the very first, after you've logged in, is you'll notice your name on the right-hand side and some helpful guidelines on how to navigate the interface. And then on the left-hand side, you'll see various tabs that highlight where you are. I'm in the blueprints page right now. And here we've got a couple of blueprints already created. We've got a vCenter on-premise for the Drupal application, and then we have a cloud version. And let me just go ahead and while I'm on the on-premise version, share with you what this actually looks like from a graphical perspective. You'll note here that we have that architecture, the on-premise architecture with the front-end load balancer, the web server, the application, and the databases in a load balanced environment. So some redundancy here. And then you have the ability to have an on-premise load and performance test. So this is a pretty straightforward, it's a graphical representation, and there's various things that you can start to do here as you deploy this in your on-premise. But we're obviously going to go and look at the blueprint for cloud, and in this case, we're going to go ahead and connect into the AWS version of this. So here you'll see a similar architecture, but you'll notice now instead of the F5 load balancer, we have the Nginx load balancer, and the Drupal application is actually using AMIs from the Amazon Web Catalog, and there's no database back here. So what we want to do is to come over here to our left-hand side and then select from our drop-down catalog what we actually want to include. And here I've got cloud provider services, and I've got a bunch of components that are identified for their respective AMIs within Amazon. So I'm going to go ahead and select the AWS Aurora DB. It's a simple selection, and then it's a drag and drop, very easy to use. And here I'm going to position it over on the right-hand side as part of a logical flow. I'm going to hover over the icon and create a connection to the actual application. So this connects the database now down to the application tier. And I'm going to repeat that function to connect it to the other instance, so we have a load balanced version. Not only does this establish connectivity, but it also the ports, the protocols, the requirements within the security groups, all of that is taken care of behind the scenes as you make those selections. So pretty straightforward on how you add that. So the next step, what I'm going to do is to actually go ahead and deploy this blueprint. And with that, we have some instructions that can help you kind of navigate on how to activate the blueprint, the deployment, the selection of various builds, and then what you're expecting. Here's an example of what that would look like once it's deployed. So it kind of gives you a guideline of where you're at in that methodology and deployment process. So I'm going to go ahead and start the deployment activity. And what you'll note here now is we have a defined timeline. So you're not going to have this running up and running forever unless you want to. So this gives you a kind of a fail-safe as to terminate the sandbox as required. And down here, we've got a couple of options to select which build number we want associated with the Drupal application. And then the data set, we may have some that are archived, some that are warm, basically different storage requirements. And then we go ahead and reserve this, blueprint for deployment. And what you'll start to know right away is now we've gone into an active state, and we are now in a sandbox mode. And if I hit the activity, you'll start to see a running dialogue of the connections within the Amazon regions that these are associated with, connectivity being established, and then the setup that starts to get underway. And with the output window, you can also have an additional dialogue of preparing the sandbox, some connectivity, the application deployment starting, and you have some nice visual illustrations that let you know that there actually is activity going on. So not only a log information that's being reflected in this activity screen, the output from a command line view, if you will, and then a visual representation letting you know that things are underway. And now you'll see that we've gone into a provisioning mode on the top right. So this takes about a minute or two, and while this is provisioning, I'll go ahead and share with you. I'll take a quick look first at the Amazon EC2 instances that are now being provisioned. So you'll notice now that these are actually put into place, and I'll come back to this window once they are fully instantiated. And while those are running, I'll also introduce you to Quali as an advanced technology partner listed here on the Amazon site. So you'll see that there are additional things that you can ascertain from this site as far as different technologies, solutions, and the industries that Quali is involved in. But it gives you an idea of the partnership with Amazon. And then an additional site is here in the Quali community. You'll notice that a lot of folks have contributed to Quali's community integration. So you'll see some are certified, some are in preview mode, and it gives you an example of what you can actually introduce. In addition to the services that AWS provides, you can have obviously different types of load balances in this case that you may want to customize or use ones that are already well known as far as F5 and others, if you will. So let's go ahead and go back into our environment, and now you'll see that the messaging here says sandbox services setup finished successfully. So here now we'll note is an IP address and other parameters that are in place with the application. So with that, what we are now ready to do is actually go into and run different services on here. So I'm going to go ahead and start to look at the different capabilities here. I'm going to minimize this output window, and we have a BlazeMeter service that we're going to go ahead and instantiate in a second. So this gives you an idea of the deployed sandbox, IP addresses, connectivity, and then the associated services that we can start to leverage. So as I start to prepare the test here, I'm going to go ahead and activate the BlazeMeter service. And as I do that, you'll start to notice on the output window that there are going to be various services that are going to be started, and then they'll be reflected in the service itself. So I'll go ahead and start the service. Here we have the test. And I already have an account on BlazeMeter with a test example ready to run. And I'm going to select the run command. And we'll take a look at the activity in the output window here. And as the test starts to run, you'll see that the test is initiated. And as I expand the window down here, you'll start to see that it's starting to run through its different startup scripts and getting those test details outputted into the environment. And once that's completed, you'll see that there's a URL for the report, and I can go ahead and select that URL. And what you'll see now is the launching of BlazeMeter, and it will start to run this test, which takes about a minute to kind of start up. And what this allows you to do is validate that your environment, what you've depicted here, is actually going to perform within the requirements that you've set for your service level agreements. So those response times, those query response times, any other type of content uploads of assets, that will give you an idea of whether this environment is effective or if you need to change some components from a replatforming perspective. So as this is almost complete here, we're going to go ahead and look at the data. and that will give you an idea of a summary report. I'm going to toggle over to the EC2 management interfaces, and you'll see that the name of those particular nodes is also in place. So Nginx Load Balancer, the Drupal content managements, which we had in redundant deployment, are now up and running. So everything looks good, and now you start to see the population of the summary tabs with load generation being activated onto that environment. So that's one quick way of ascertaining that things are up and running and are effectively functional in this environment. The last thing I'm going to do is, once you've got the information from your reports and you're good with what you need this environment to do, you can start to tear it down. And that's as simple as selecting this end sandbox. And when I select OK, this actually starts the teardown. And what you'll start to see here is, if we go to the output window, that apps are being powered off and deleted. And this is actually tearing down the instances in AWS. And essentially, it is now deactivating the connections and the services. So if I look at the EC2 console and I do a refresh, you'll start to see that things are shutting down, and then they'll be terminated once the activity is complete. So this takes about a few seconds because of connectivity and the teardown process of Amazon. You have to rely on their sequence of how they gracefully shut down their instances. And any third-party services that are activated, like the Nginx load balancer in this case, or any other test criteria, they're also being gracefully powered down, shut off. And so if you do need to reactivate them at a later date, they can be gracefully stood up again. And so those are being powered off. And once they're in that state, you'll notice in EC2 that they are now slowly starting to be terminated. And then in the proper sequence, everything is shut down correctly. And with that, we will now like to summarize the benefits of actually having this in place. Is really about simplifying that application rollout. What you've had an opportunity to share on this demo is how quickly we can stand something up, how we can automate and expedite this deployment process by having these blueprints in place, and we can reshape any one of those nodes. And this allows us to control the costs, essentially to only utilize those resources as required, and then decrease the risk. That's what we're really after here. Which components actually work with our applications and which ones are not adding the value that we expect. So that decrease of risk with this replatform strategy is a key criteria as the benefits are realized as you take this approach. And with that, if you want to learn more about what we've shared with you on this migration approach, there are articles on our website as well as a video that summarizes what we've just discussed. And then there's a blog that reflects a step-by-step process on how to actually accomplish this. And now I'd like to open up the floor for Q&A with Pascal.
All right, thanks, Das. That was very informative. A great demo, by the way. Okay, so we have a few questions here. And the first one is, do you need to use a local image repository to create the VMs, or can you use the images available in the Amazon Marketplace? So let me take that question. So one of the key benefits of CloudShell is that you don't need to copy over the images that you want to use. You can use directly all the images available in the AWS marketplace, and there are thousands of them, and the benefits is that the licensing is already taken care of as part of the images that are configured by many vendors participating in the marketplace. So let me see the second question. As part of your application replatforming, when do you decide to use native AWS services versus third-party vendors, or even lift and shape? So Das, I'll let you answer that one.
That's a great question. This is really the benefit of the CloudShell service, where you can start to determine which service meets your application requirements. As you may know, a lot of the on-premise data center applications are highly customized to take advantage of different components. So as you start to reshape that in the Amazon environment, there may be some services that meet that criteria really well. There may be some right out of the gate with AWS that fit that directly. So you can do a determination of whatever your service levels or your query response time for your application and determine which ones natively support that in AWS and which ones require advanced features and some services that may provide that. So that's how you can do that reshaping and determining which one meets your requirement.
Okay, so let me look at the next question. In this process, how does your solution help assess the security and compliance of an application in the public cloud?
That's obviously one that's front and center in today's age, where anything that you move to a public cloud is subject to regulations, and it has to have stringent controls around security and how the accessibility and how that data is protected. So what this lift and reshape and replatforming, if you will, allows you to do is to introduce different vulnerability scanners, different regulatory rule sets and policies to determine if those components that you've selected as services or applications are adherent to the latest security and compliance regulations. So you can do scans, you can do other assessments, and then you can tailor your decision on which ones meet your security posture, your risk tolerance, if you will. So you can go to your customers and say, we are compliant or adherent to whichever regulation that you are required to meet. So this allows you this process and the solutioning, if you will, of replatforming your architecture, a report that gives you an idea of whether you are compliant or not in compliant and what those remediation steps should be.
Okay, thanks. Now, we talk a lot about AWS today, which is the clear market leader in the public cloud. Now, do you support with this solution other cloud providers? Let's see, I want to open up my options.
Great question. The flexibility of CloudShell is exactly that, to allow you to mix and match a multi-cloud solutions. So there are workloads that you may want to run in Amazon, but there may be some Microsoft-specific workloads that can benefit from Azure, or other workloads that work well in Oracle. So you as an organization now have the flexibility to look at different public cloud and cloud providers, if you will, to determine what works. And in CloudShell, you can architect, reshape, and look at what meets that application requirement. With that, different cloud services, when you think of SaaS applications, whether you're using Salesforce or other types of HR apps, or even like what we demonstrated with load and performance tests, other integrations can come into place, and now you have that flexibility of mix match, whether it's in a public cloud or if it's on-premise using OpenStack or vCenter or other hybrid modes. All of that is supported within CloudShell, and that's one of the real key benefits of utilizing this approach.
All right, I think that's the last question I see. So thanks everyone for attending this webinar. Thanks Dos for presenting. I think it was very informative. And again, if you need to find out more information about our solution and this process, go to Quali.com. And there's many assets that you can download. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.